I do a fair number of reviews for my channel. It's the type of video that I make most at this point. As I've said previously in one of my videos, reviews are this strange mix of subjective and objective bundled together. People like and dislike different things and like or dislike those things for different reasons. Instead of making another video criticizing reviews or bringing up issues with the practice, I wanted to present my own approach. I also wanted to let people understand where I'm coming from when I review games. Now, some of you may have already figured this out if you've watched a few of my reviews, but I just wanted to kind of be upfront with how I approach them. To start off with, I want to present the attitude that I want to have when reviewing. I want to review games in such a way that actually makes it seem like I enjoy the medium that I've chosen to do reviews for. I sometimes get the feeling that in order to be taken seriously as a reviewer, you need to be very critical of every game you play or for whatever type of review that you're doing. Now, I am very comfortable saying that there are parts of games that I don't enjoy, but I just don't want to get to the point where I become so critical that I lose the enjoyment of playing games. I don't want to become similar to Anton Ego from Ratatouille, someone who is a food critic and yet seems to find very little joy in food.
I don't like food, I love it. If I don't love it, I don't swallow.
I don't really want to become that way with games where I'm reviewing a lot of games, but I just never seem to like many of the games that I'm actually playing. I want to demonstrate my love for games and try to lean more on the positive than the negative. I was so committed to this idea that at first I wasn't going to do more traditional reviews. My original thought was to do game recommendation videos. These were games that I called gold star games after the gold stars that you'd get in school for doing well. I ran into issues with this approach fairly quickly. I never knew if new games would be good enough to be recommended, so it could take quite a bit of time between finding these gold star games. This didn't seem an optimal use of my time. It also kept me from covering games that I couldn't fully recommend, but that I still enjoyed despite the flaws they had. I also felt that presenting games that I didn't enjoy also had value as well. This wound up leading me to change my approach and then doing more traditional style reviews, even though I still don't want to be a super critical reviewer. Another important aspect of my approach that I want to mention is that I only review games that I've finished or spent enough time on to feel like I have a good sense of how the game works and how I feel about said game. This is going to mean slower video turnout and fewer games played, but I don't think that you can really get a full sense of a game by only playing half of it. Admittedly, sometimes you can, but I feel like for a lot of games, especially games that have a good amount of story or a lot of mechanics that don't get kind of unlocked until the second half of the game, it's a lot harder to make that judgment by only playing a little portion of a game. Now, if I were to do a review on a game that I only spent a small amount of time with, I would make sure to mention that in the review and be very upfront with how much time I spent on it. There are games that I haven't reviewed because of this lack of time investment. I'm talking about you, 100% Orange Juice. Looking back, I think I should have done a review of it and just mentioned that I had only played it a few hours because I just didn't enjoy my time with it very much and didn't think it was a very good game overall. If you've watched any of my reviews on the channel, you'll know that I tend to separate my reviews into focusing on different aspects of a game. I like approaching game reviews with a sense of organization. I like to separate my reviews into three main categories: story, gameplay, and art and sound. I also like to mention if there are any performance issues, which I used to do in every video, but I have decided to only add this in if there are actual issues. It just always felt like a bit of a waste of time to add that section in to simply say I didn't have any issues. I then like to wrap things up with my final thoughts and my rating for the game. I feel like this is a fairly standard way of approaching reviews, but I do like the ability to pull a game apart and focus on one aspect at a time. It's not a perfect system, as sometimes games don't have much of a story or there are aspects that kind of cross over categories, but I still feel like separating these out helps me to present my thoughts a bit better. Now, I do end these reviews with a number rating. I know this practice isn't always looked at too fondly, and while I do understand why, I haven't really found a system that I like better. I feel that any system has its flaws because there are so many factors that go into a review of games. How was the story? Was gameplay fun? How long was the game? How much did it cost? Did it do anything different? And on and on. I wanted to give my thoughts behind what my number ratings mean. These are already thoughts I've had in order to help me have some kind of direction for rating, and I just wanted to let you know them as well. I have no illusion that there is some kind of scientific precision involved in this process, but I did kind of want people to know where I'm coming from in general when I'm giving these ratings. A few things to note before I get into what the ratings mean. First is that you need to understand that I view any game over 5 to be a game that is more good than bad. Even 5s are games that I view as kind of an equal mix of good and bad. It's only once we go below 5 that I think a game is more bad than good. This means that the majority of my ratings are going to be above 5. Since keeping track of what I would rate games, there are only 2 games that I have rated below a 5 out of around 70 games. Second, I only use whole numbers. I just honestly couldn't tell you what the difference between a 9.1 game and a 9 game would be for me, so I don't use a system like that. I could understand doing 0.5s, but I think just sticking to whole numbers is less complicated and easier for everyone. Third, it's really hard to compare ratings between games. It works maybe when comparing games that are within the same series, like the Marvel Spider-Man or the Final Fantasy series, but it doesn't work so well when comparing these types of games to indies or free-to-play games. I try to base my rating of the game on how much I enjoyed it and what the game is, whether that's genre or money behind it or how much it costs, things like that. I can't fault an indie free-to-play RPG like Grimm's Hollow for not being like Final Fantasy. Lastly, as I opened with, these ratings are both objective and subjective. While we may play the same game, our experiences will be different. My ratings are just how I navigate looking at games. I know that others have different standards, or even if using something similar to what I have, we'll have games land at different places than me. With that out of the way, let's get to the ratings. We'll start with the highest and work our way down. Now, 10 out of 10 doesn't mean that I think a game is perfect. Instead, that rating means that I really enjoyed a game and what flaws it had just didn't detract from the experience at all for me. To be honest, I don't think a perfect game really exists, but I do think that there are many games out there that are strong enough to make their flaws not matter in the long run. These are the games that I could play and enjoy over and over again. Whether it's happily replaying the story of a game or never getting tired of going back to the gameplay of a game that doesn't have a set ending. Now, 9 out of 10 game is of course still a great game and one that I would still consider among my favorites. But there was just something lacking in the game that reduced the experience for me a little bit. Maybe it was just parts of the story that felt a bit off. Gameplay that, while fun, was maybe a little too repetitive, had something I didn't enjoy, or was too simple, things like that. Nothing major, but just enough to detract a little bit from the experience and make it be like, I really liked it overall, but there was this one thing here that I just didn't enjoy as much. 8 out of 10 is still a good game and one I'd be very willing to replay. But I also acknowledge that there are some aspects of the game that I just didn't click with. This could be having a more uneven story overall, aspects of the gameplay that I didn't enjoy, or that had elements that were just frustrating. This is the rating that was the bottom limit for my Gold Star games, so this means that I was still more than willing to recommend a game at 8 with zero qualms, even if I do acknowledge that the game did have some issues as well, but it still was a game that was worth your time. Just, know that there were some things that I didn't like about it. 7 out of 10 games are what I would call flawed, but still enjoyable. Sometimes these games can even be rather addictive despite the deep flaws that are in them. An example here for me would be Marvel's Avengers. That game had some massive flaws in repetitive missions, the focus on live service, poor menus, and some grind-heavy gameplay, but I still had quite a bit of fun with it. 7s are games that I can enjoy even with the flaws. They may not be games I go back to or play often, but when I do, I still wind up enjoying myself. 6 out of 10 is for games that have some serious struggles, but there's some aspect of the game that was interesting enough to keep me invested. At this point, there are a lot of combinations possible. Maybe it's a game with an interesting concept and story idea that just isn't fully developed and also fails to have compelling gameplay. It could be a game that has a vague, unsatisfying story, but gameplay that is a little bit fun. Maybe it's a game that has addictive gameplay, but is so full of microtransactions or grinding that it just detracts from the game and makes it feel like a chore or a money pit. And the basic idea here is that there is some good element that kind of makes the game stand out at least a little bit, but the rest of the game just really fails to lift that idea up any higher. 5 out of 10 is what I would consider games that are equal parts good and bad. Nothing really stands out one way or another. They're okay, but I just struggle to really get invested in any aspect of the game. These are games that are just largely bland or forgettable. They may also have a few performance issues or a general lack of polish that really keeps them from standing standing out at all. 4 out of 10 are games that do have some good things going for it, but just don't really get there and just don't feel enjoyable to play. You know, it's games that have like a story that could have been compelling, but it just doesn't really develop enough to actually feel good by the end. Or it's gameplay that like, oh, this idea could have been really good, but it just isn't really developed enough to actually, you know, work properly or feel as good as it could have been in your imagination. And most likely with a 4 out of 10 game, there's a combination going on here, that there's some kind of mix of story that doesn't feel satisfying, gameplay that doesn't live up to expectations, maybe even some technical issues in the mix, maybe some graphical or art design, sound design issues. What's good just doesn't really stand out enough to counteract the negatives that are going on. 3 out of 10 is the lowest rating I've actually given to a game. Hello there again, 100% orange juice. At this point, there's not much I find enjoyable about the game. It maybe has some interesting aspect that seems like it could be fun, but just really fails to deliver. This is, you know, super repetitive and unfulfilling gameplay, too much randomness, poor story, and to a lesser extent, lacking in art or sound direction. Maybe it's just really generic feeling, or it's really bad to look at. Another option is that it has some major bugs that detract from a decent story or gameplay, like kind of a mid-range game, like a 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10, but those bugs and glitches and things like that just really drag it down. 2 out of 10 is where we're getting close to a game being unplayable. I really don't expect that I'll have too many games that hit this low. This is where you have very poor gameplay, stories that just don't make sense or filled with typos, inconsistencies, things like that, poor artistic direction, and probably also major performance issues at like a 2 out of 10. Like that would be kind of what would be needed for me to really give a game that low. And 1 out of 10 would be a game that is just awful. There is next to nothing good about this game, and it's pretty much not fun to play at all, or maybe even just completely actually unplayable. It just crashes, you can't get into it, you can't do anything. Like, it would probably have to be that bad to get a rating this low from me. This is the lowest I would rate a game, but I honestly don't expect to use this rating. One never knows. I suppose there could be a game that I run across that is this bad, but I'm not expecting there will be that many of them. Now that's how I would summarize my use of ratings. Again, there isn't a science, but this should help give a little bit of understanding to how I approach my rating system. I hope that gives you a bit of an idea of where I'm coming from in terms of how I review games. If there is something that I missed that you're curious about, feel free to ask in the comments and I'll be sure to answer you as best as I can. It might even be worth looking at a little bit closer with another video too, so we'll see. That's all I've got to say about this for now though, so I'll see you in the next video.